Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a book by book, chapter by chapter, verse by verse study of the entire Bible. Currently we are in Second Chronicles chapter 8. Last time we studied the building and dedication of the temple, and then in this couple of chapters we're going to just kind of conclude Solomon's life, and then we will get in terms of Solomon's son, the division, the split, the dividing, the revolt, I should say, the splitting of the kingdom. Also, very interesting story about the Queen of Sheba that we're going to talk about. You know, did her and Solomon get it on? Produce a love child? Let's see. All right. Chapter 8, verse 1. At the end of 20 years during which Solomon had built the Lord's temple and his own palace. So the temple was built first, and then Solomon's palace was built. Again, a glorious palace. And remember, he was able to do all of this with the wisdom of God. Verse 2, Solomon had rebuilt the cities Hiram gave him and settled Israelites there. Solomon went to Hamid-Zobah and seized it. He built Tadmor in the wilderness along with all the storage cities that he had built in Hamath. He built Upper Beth Horon and Lower Beth Horon, fortified cities with walls, gates, and bars. Baalith, all the storage cities belonged to Solomon, all the chariot cities, the cavalry cities, and everything Solomon desired to build in Jerusalem, Lebanon, or anywhere else in the land of his dominions. Now, Solomon lived in a time of peace as well, so he didn't really have wars. As you remember, David had constant war. He conquered a lot. This afforded Solomon's time of peace. Verse 7. As for all the people who remained of the Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and the Jebusites, who were not from Israel, their descendants who remained in the land after them, those the Israelites had not completely destroyed, Solomon imposed forced labor on them. It is this way today. Now again, this term here tells us that the writings of Chronicles were kind of split up. In other words, there was a couple of ways of looking at the writings. That something that the scribe Ezra wrote this. And Ezra, we will see later, he actually, after Chronicles, you will see Ezra and Nehemiah. And this is after the 70-year captivity. After the 70-year captivity in Babylon, and also from this time frame, we're talking about nearly 500 years. So when he says it is to this work today, this would have been written sometime before the Babylonian destruction. Another thing, too, that when he says here that verse 9, but Solomon did not consign let me go back and read verse 8 again. The descendants who remained in the land after the Israelites had not completely destroyed, Solomon imposed forced labor on them. It is this way to this day. Now, the forced labor is sort of a different term of slavery. Look at the next verse. But Solomon did not consign the Israelites to be slaves for his work. They were soldiers, commanders, and his captains, and commanders of his chariots to this day. Now, by the way, and I'm not going to get into this argument. It's not an argument. I'm not going to get into this. The law of Moses not only permitted slavery, it regulated it. Now, to understand this, well, we can't understand it in terms of the why, but they were slaves. In other words, he made slaves out of the non-Israelites who were in the land, and God says that's okay. That's okay to do. What the law prohibited was to make a fellow Israelite a slave. Okay. All right. That's just a reality I cannot explain in terms of why would God allow that. All right, verse 10. These were King Solomon's deputies, 250 who ruled over the people. Solomon brought the daughter of Pharaoh from the city of David to the house he had built for her. For he said, my wife must not live in the house of David, king of Israel, because the place of the ark of the Lord has come into a holy. Solomon's marriage, a lot of times during this time, they would have these marriages for political reasons, political alliances. Okay, whether he loved her or not, he might have loved her, we don't know, but for sure it was more of a political alliance. So you're not going to go to war with each other. So Israel's not going to go to war with Egypt. Egypt's not going to go to war with Israel because of this marriage. And if you were a woman, sometimes it'd be like, you have to take one for the team and marry. Verse 12, at that time, Solomon offered burnt offerings to the Lord on the Lord's altar he had made in front of the portico. He followed the daily regimen for offerings according to the commandments of Moses for Sabbaths, new moons, and the 3 annual appointed feasts, the festivals of unleavened bread, the festivals of weeks, and the festivals of booths. Now, let me stop, because really Solomon probably would be the last one up until the time of Josiah, the king, that will have these festivals, observe these festivals according to the law. Verse 14, according to the ordinances of his father David, he appointed the divisions of the priests over the service and the Levites over their responsibilities to offer and praise and minister before the priests, following the daily regiment of the gatekeepers by let me read that again. According to the ordinances of his father David, he appointed the division of the priests over the service, of the Levites over their responsibilities to offer praise and to minister before the priests, following the daily requirements, and of the gatekeepers by their divisions with respect to each gate. For this had been the command of David, the man of God. So again, this worship established during the early years of Solomon's reign. And whenever you see this, you always see a prosperous land. Whenever people worship God, whenever you establish that. Verse 15, they did not turn aside from the king's command regarding the priests and the Levites concerning any matter or concerning the treasuries. All of Solomon's work was carried out from the day of the foundation was laid of the Lord's temple until it was finished. So the temple was the Lord's temple was completed. At that time, Solomon went to Ejon, Geber, and to Eloth of the seashore of the land of Edom. So Hiram sent ships to him by his servants, along with the crews and experienced seamen. They went with Solomon's servants to Ophir and took from there 17 tons of gold and delivered them to King Solomon. So yes, Solomon again will amass great wealth. Chapter 9. The Queen of Sheba heard of Solomon's fame. Now, the Queen of Sheba was without a doubt an African queen. The people of Sheba were dark-skinned people. So without a doubt, the Queen of Sheba was black. Okay. And at the time, she was a very powerful, she had a very powerful kingdom. So in her own right, she stood as a very wise queen, ruling at that time over the nation that was very prosperous. So it says, the Queen of Sheba heard of Solomon's fame. Now remember I said a while back that wisdom can always be seen. You don't have to always, if a person is spending more time talking about their wisdom, that's not wisdom. Wisdom always comes with works. In other words, you can always see the wisdom in people. When people say, I'm wise, that's no. You could see it. You don't have to say a word. And we're going to see this in this story right here. She said she heard of it. Everybody was talking about, hey man, that king in Israel, that cat is wise here. So it says the Queen of Sheba heard of Solomon's fame, so she came to test Solomon with difficult questions at Jerusalem, with a very large entourage, with camels bearing spices, gold, and abundance, and precious stones. She came to Solomon and spoke with him about everything that was on her heart. Now, she had prepared all of these questions. And the fact that she came with a large entourage of spices and gold in itself also shows of her wealth, okay, of her status. Verse 2, so Solomon answered all her questions. Nothing was too difficult for Solomon to explain to her. Now, one thing about wisdom that you have to, wisdom starts with God. We're going to see this later on when we read in the book of Proverbs. The beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. We're going to kind of open, of course, deal with the idea of what wisdom, true wisdom is. In other words, wisdom is not just kind of philosophizing. It's practical. And that's why I said you could see that. She answered his questions. But notice what happened in verse 3 when the Queen of Sheba observed Solomon's wisdom. Now remember I told you wisdom is always seen. When the Queen of Sheba observed Solomon's wisdom. Now what did she observe? Now watch this. The palace he had built. The food at his table. His servants' residence. His attendants' servants and their attire. His cupbearers and their attire. And the burnt offering he offered at the Lord's temple. It took her breath away. In other words, what she saw was spectacular beyond what she could have ever imagined. The way they dressed, the way they served, the way they walked. She said to the king, the report I heard in my own country about your words and about your wisdom is true. But I didn't believe the report until I came and, get this, saw with my own eyes. Indeed, I was not even told the half of your great wisdom. You far exceed the report I heard. How happy are your men? How happy are these servants of yours, who always stand in your presence, hearing your wisdom. Now, just stop for a moment. Now, she just said something right here, too. Solomon would sit and just give proverbs after proverbs. People would also, she wasn't the only one. Now, remember, there were servants standing around hearing their exchange. So the servants also heard that. So the servants became wise. Okay? It almost be like if you could stand around a billionaire, people who know stock in the stock market, and you hear their conversation. If you're the butler and you stand and you're hearing their conversation, you should pick up on some of that, and you should become a billionaire yourself. Anyway, verse 8. May the Lord your God be praised. He delighted in you and put you on the throne as king for the Lord your God. Because your God loves Israel enough to establish them forever, he has set you over them as king to carry out justice and righteousness. Now, one of the things that's interesting about this here You hear these stories about whether or not if the Queen of Sheba and King David got it on, and some even question if they had a child together. My point is, it could be true. Solomon, as we will see later, loved the ladies. Solomon loved the ladies. But the biggest takeaway that we should gain, not from the gossip or innuendos, but the fact that as a result of coming and hearing Solomon, she recognized the true God of heaven. That she was able to then to take that back to her land. Okay, that's the biggest takeaway here. Verse 9, then she gave the king 4.5 tons of gold, a great quantity of spices and precious stones. There had never been such spices as those the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. So again, this tells you of her status as well. In addition, Hiram's servants and Solomon's servants who bought gold from Ophrah also bought algum wood, and precious stone. The king made algum wood into walkways for the Lord's temple and for the king's palace, and to lyres, harps, and singers. Never before had anything like them been seen in the land of Judah. And then King Solomon gave Queen Sheba her every desire, whatever she asked, far more than she had bought the king. Then she, along with her servants, returned to her own country. So he gave her, again, even more than what she gave him. Then it says, the weight of gold that came to Solomon annually was 25 tons. Now think about this, 25 tons. A ton is like 2,000 pounds, 25 tons. This came annually, beside what was bought by merchants and traders. All the Arabian kings and governors of the land also bought gold and silver to Solomon. So there was just an abundance amount of gold. It's just, verse 15, King Solomon made 200 large shields of hammered gold. 15 pounds of hammered gold went into each shield. He made 300 small shields of hammered gold. About 8 pounds of gold went into each shield. The king put them in the house of the fourth of Lebanon. So even if they went to, think about this, if they ever went to war, his guys showed up with gold shields. Verse 17, the king also made a large throne and overlaid it with pure gold. The throne had 6 steps. There was a footstool covered in gold. For the throne, the armrests on either side of the seat were 2 lions standing beside the armrest. 12 lions were standing there on 6 steps, one on each end. Nothing like it had ever been made in any kingdom. So he had this again. I wish I would have found a picture, artist rendition of this throne that Solomon had created here. Verse 20. All the King Solomon's drinking cups were gold. All his utensils of the house of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. There was no silver, since it was considered as nothing in Solomon's time. So in other words, silver was like how we treat pennies. For the king's ships kept going to Tarshish with hammering servants, and once every 3 years, the ships of Tarshish would arrive bearing gold, silver, ivory, apes, peacocks. There's a whole bunch of things. They would have this kind of 3-year trek. Verse 22, King Solomon surpassed all the kings of the world in riches and wisdom, and all the kings of the world wanted an audience with Solomon to hear the wisdom God had put in his mouth. Now keep this in mind, that when all of the kings did come, they also was hearing the wisdom of God. They were exposed to the knowledge of God. They would take that knowledge back to their land. Now, that doesn't mean that they turned to God, but here's my point. They were exposed, okay? Verse 24, each of them would bring his own gift items, silvers of gold, clothing, weapons, spices, and horses and mules as an annual tribute. Solomon had 4,000 stalls for horses and chariots and 12,000 horsemen. He stationed them in chariot cities and in the kings and with the king in Jerusalem. He ruled over the king. He ruled over all the kings from the Euphrates River to the land of the Philistines, and as far as the border of Egypt. The king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones, and he made cedar as abundant as sycamore in the Judean foothills. They were bringing horses for Solomon from Egypt and from all of the countries. Now, one of the things he would have, even though he lived in a time of peace, all of these, like these 4,000 stalls, okay, they were stationed throughout all the kingdom. In other words, he didn't have to go from, he didn't have to rally troops and their armory from like one place. They were already just stationed all through Israel. The remaining events of Solomon's reign, from the beginning to the end, are the written events of Nathan the prophet, the prophecies of Ahijah and the Shilonite, and the visions of Edo the seer concerning Jeroboam the son of Nebat. Solomon reigned in Jerusalem Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all of Israel for 40 years. Solomon rested with his father and was buried in the city of his father David. His son Rehoboam became king in his place. Now we get into Rehoboam next time, obviously. And as you can see, the Chronicles doesn't get into Solomon's idolatry. In other words, how in the end of his life his heart turned because of his wives. Okay, it just told really of the wisdom that God has given him, the temple that he had built. So again, Solomon was one of the greatest kings. Now, of course, when we read Kings, we see towards the end of his life, he totally turned from the Lord, and which was tragic in itself. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. As always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. But remember, all comments are welcome. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I will see you in the next study.